Good morning, Sukhi Hotu. A warm greeting to all the brothers and sisters in the Dharma. Thank you very much for joining us today in this lecture. I am happy to share with you the original teachings of the Buddha. I am delighted to do this recording for Wisdom Park, the Buddhist Education Resource Center of Universal Wisdom Foundation in the Philippines. In the coming weeks, until the quarantine restrictions in the Philippines are lifted, I will be doing a series of video lectures for Wisdom Park. The topic today is the Four Noble Truths, the fundamental doctrine of the Buddha. This teaching is from the first sermon delivered by the Buddha known as Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, which means setting into motion the wheel of Dharma. Today happens to mark the second anniversary of the passing of my beloved teacher, Venerable Dr. Madawela Punaji Mahathera. In honoring my teacher Bhante Punaji, I shall use his very precise translation of Pali terms and sharing directly from the original scriptures of Theravadan tradition known as the Pali Canon. Before the Buddha became enlightened, he was born as Prince Siddhartha, who left the palace to cultivate and develop to become enlightened, to find the solution to the suffering of this world. During the course of his cultivation and development as Prince Siddhartha, before he became enlightened, he had met 5 ascetics and they practiced together. So when he decided to go on his own and became enlightened, he decided to deliver his first sermon to the 5 ascetics. And the first sermon is called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, setting into motion the wheel of Dharma. The Four Noble Truths in Pali is called Chattari Ariyana Sachani. Now, this is commonly translated as Four Noble Truths. Bhante translated the word Arya not as noble. Noble is a very common translation, but it is not very precise. Bhante mentioned that Arya is beyond noble, higher than noble. It is out of the normal, beyond normal. This is why he commonly translated the word Arya as supernormal. Sometimes he uses the word sublime or supernormal, beyond normal. So the four, and for the purpose of easy explanation for everyone who is familiar with the conventional or the traditional translations, I would still be using some of the old common translation like Four Noble Truths, so that it's easy for you to understand or follow. So the Four Noble Truths, what are they? The first is dukkha. There is dukkha. Bhante calls this the insecurity of life. Now we'll go into more details later on. So dukkha really is insecurity of life, and this is bringing us a lot of discomfort and disturbing the body and the mind, and therefore it is called suffering. Dukkha is normally translated as suffering. The second noble truth is samudaya, and this is really talking about the cause of this suffering, the origin of this suffering. And Bhante says that it's because we are personalizing everything that we are experiencing, and therefore we even personalize the body that exists, and therefore we are really undergoing a dream of existence. We are living through a dream of existence, and this is really the origin of our insecurity. The third is nirodha. Nirodha is a very powerful word, very strong word. It is not just stopping something or ending something. It is really the complete eradication, the complete cessation. So it's the complete cessation of the insecurity of life, and this is done by awakening. And again, this is an important word. Bhante likes to use the word awakening, and I too fully agree with that, because the word awakening is a more precise explanation. So this awakening from the dream of existence, that is what Nirodha means. The cessation of insecurity by fully awakening from the dream of existence. And finally, there is the word Magga. Now, Magga is commonly translated as the path, right? That is a good translation, but Bhante sometimes uses another word, and that is the way. Personally, I prefer to use the word way for a very simple reason, right? When you talk about the path, you're talking about the road. When you're talking about the way, you're talking about the journey. So what is it that Buddha was trying to teach us? Was he just saying there is this road? Or was he saying that you take the journey? So the way is a more precise way of explaining the word Magga. We have to live it, and we have to experience it. And this is again a very important take-home point I learned during the years I spent with Bhante. We must look at everything from an experiential perspective. So the way is an experiential perspective of what Magga is. The road or the path is just an existential perspective. So it's better to look at it from an experiential perspective. The way leading to the cessation of insecurity. And this is by practicing the supernormal Eightfold Way. Some people call this the Noble Eightfold Path. So the supernormal Eightfold Way. Let's take a look at how it all began for the Buddha. He was born as a prince. Before he became enlightened, he was Prince Siddhartha. He was living a very sheltered life. His father protected him from going out into the townships and seeing what really is going on out there. But of course, from time to time, Prince Siddhartha managed to leave the palace and witness for himself the realities of life outside the palace. Since the dawn of civilization, the greatest problem to be solved by all of humanity is the problem of existence. This problem of existence is in fact what every religion is trying to solve. So what is the problem of existence? First, there is birth, there is aging, there is sickness, and there is death. And how do we handle all this? So the solution to handling this whole process, that is really the problem of existence that every religion is trying to solve. So when Prince Siddhartha left the palace, he realized that he needed to learn more deeply what is the realities. And one of the important things to practice in those days, it was meditation. So he went to seek two very well-known teachers to learn about meditation. The first teacher he came across is Alara Kalama. And from the first teacher, Alara Kalama, he had learned how to meditate to a very high level, beyond jhanas, beyond what we know of as jhanas. So he had learned how to meditate to a very high level, and he accomplished the same level as the teacher. In fact, the teacher said to him that now that you have reached that state where you are my equal, why don't you stay and together we will teach? Well, he realized that he needed to go beyond that. He hasn't reached the ultimate state of meditation yet. So he decided to look for another teacher, and he went and sought after the other teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, right? And Uddaka Ramaputta is the son of Rama. Uddaka Ramaputta actually was more or less had attained the same level as Alara Kalama. However, his father, right, Rama, had gone beyond that, and his father taught him the technique, how to go beyond that. And having learned the technique, he was still practicing it, was not yet able to accomplish beyond the level that he had accomplished. So Prince Siddhartha learned from this Udaka Ramaputta this technique and decided that he could not continue to practice together with the teacher, because the teacher himself, after all these years, had not reached that level. So he decided to leave the teacher and go on his own. And he met up with 5 ascetics, and together they went into the forest and practiced asceticism, thinking that by practicing asceticism, self-mortification and self-torment, they could then discover the realities of life to solve this problem of existence. But he soon realized that this was not the case. When he practiced asceticism, of course they learned not to eat, they learned not to drink, and refrain from all forms of sensual pleasures. Finally, he could not reach that state, so he felt that he needed to do that one last thing. Since he had stopped eating and stopped drinking, he had become very, very thin. And now he decided that he wanted to try stopping breathing. So when he tried that, that was when he fainted and nearly died from that experience. Fortunately, when he fainted, a lady passed by who was so happened, she was on her way to offer alms to monks in the temple nearby. Her name was Lady Sujata. So she passed by and offered the food to Prince Siddhartha, the ascetic. And from there, Prince Siddhartha recovered and realized that asceticism wasn't the way. So he decided that he needed to now find the real solution to the problem of existence. So he wandered further away and reached a place, a village, which today is called Bodh Gaya, and found this great big Bodhi tree just outside the town of Bodh Gaya, and decided to meditate under the Bodhi tree. And when he meditated under the Bodhi tree, of course, we all know during the practice of our meditation, the mind runs around from time to time, you know, like a monkey mind, and therefore his mind was being disturbed by all kinds of thoughts. And we call this disturbance as some inner psychological disturbance, right? It is not disturbance from external factor, but something from internal. He practiced what he learned from the 2 teachers, and he recalled during his childhood that he was able to attain jhana by simply relaxing. So combining his past experiences and what he had learned from the last teacher, the technique that the father of that teacher passed down to him, he actually reached the ultimate state. In fact, this ultimate state is being able to absolutely stop the mind. He had brought the mind to a complete stillness. The mind had completely stopped, no thoughts. And this is called Sanya Vedayita Nirodha. The mind has completely stopped. Absolutely no perception, no sensation, no activity whatsoever. And when he woke up from that stopping of the mind, he became enlightened. And that is how Prince Siddhartha attained enlightenment and became the Buddha. So after his awakening, the Buddha delivered the first sermon, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, where he spoke about dukkha and what is the problem with dukkha, what is causing dukkha, the ending and full cessation of dukkha, and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. The word dukkha is commonly translated as suffering, and when you say suffering, that word sounds very severe. It sounds to a lot of people like it's a big thing. In fact, this is one of the things that has led to misunderstanding from other religions. They say, oh, Buddhism is always talking about suffering. Buddhism is so negative, so pessimistic. Actually, it is not correct. The The Buddha was teaching the solution to dukkha, the solution to overcome and end all dukkha. The Buddha was not talking about that we are always in dukkha, that there is a way to get out of dukkha. That's what the Buddha was teaching. It's like the doctor, the medical doctor. So when you are sick, where do you go? In modern times, we go and see the doctor. And when you go to the doctor, what does the doctor do? The doctor diagnoses your illness and then he prescribes medicine. And the medicine that he prescribes, he gives it to you and then you take it. When you take that medicine, you become well. You recover from your sickness. That medicine cures the sickness. Buddhism is the same. The Buddha came and the Buddha taught the Dharma. The Dharma is the medicine, and the medicine cures the patient from dukkha. That is what the Dharma does. So Buddhism is not about living through suffering all the time. Buddhism is about how to cure yourself from suffering. And therefore, if you don't think that, oh, the doctor is always, causing you illness, if you don't think like that, then you shouldn't be even thinking that Buddhism is always talking about suffering. Buddhism is really about how to overcome suffering and how to cure yourself of it, and eventually reaching the highest and most supreme state of awakening called Nibbana. And that is what Buddhism is all about. So the word dukkha also has other meanings, and it's very important because some of these Bhante Punanji has explained beautifully. Now, we know it is commonly translated as suffering, but in reality, Bhante pointed out, it is insecurities. We are insecure about something. Something has hurt us, something has affected us. Now we feel insecure, uncomfortable. And that is insecurities of life. And it is also dissatisfactoriness. Right? Whatever we experience, we're not happy with it, we are dissatisfied with it, we want to change it. That is dukkha. And when we experience things that are not what we want, and we can't get rid of things that hurt us, and if we cannot get what we are pursuing or chasing after, we are experiencing some form of unhappiness. That is also dukkha. But actually, if we look at it scientifically, dukkha is really basically, firstly, stress. That is disturbance of the body, the physiological disturbances. And Bhante Punanji has always explained this in terms of the general adaptation syndrome that he spoke about a lot of times, referring to Hans Selye, the endocrinologist who explained about the general adaptation syndrome, and that is the condition of stress. And also distress. Distress is disturbance to the mind, and Bhante has always pointed out, it is our emotion that is causing us so much distress. We got to learn how to tame our emotion by waking up, by becoming conscious. It is only through the conscious mind, the cognitive mind, that we can overcome this distress in our emotional mind. So dukkha can be any one of these conditions: suffering, insecurities, dissatisfactoriness, unhappiness, stress, distress. They all disturb the body and the mind. Moving on, when the Buddha delivered his first sermon, he didn't just talk about dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. He started by talking about the medial way, Majjhima Patipada, and he started describing the middle way before he actually went on to talk about the dukkha and the solution to dukkha. So what is the medial way? In explaining the medial way, the Buddha pointed out that we should steer clear of two extremities. Two things we should completely avoid. And what are these two? First, it is this reaction to emotional urges. We react to emotional urges, and that reaction we think will bring us happiness. For example, if we feel something is pleasant and we like it, it is normal for us to pursue. We go after it, we get it, we want it. If we feel something is unpleasant, we don't like it, we want to get rid of it. So doing these things is reacting to emotional urges. And that's what the Buddha pointed out, that we should refrain from this reacting to emotional urges. One of the important things I want to point out about learning from Bhante Punnaji is that he had really studied this and understood this so deeply, he was able to simplify it for us. He basically pointed out that all the problems we have in the world associated with dukkha is really our reaction to emotions. So this is really the first part, and that is thinking that people seek happiness by reacting to emotional urges. And the other extremities that the Buddha pointed out we should abstain from or refrain from is really the practice of asceticism. And this is the other extreme of the whole process. Trying to be good. We think that by trying to be good, we force ourselves not to indulge. So this is called self-torment and self-mortification. And taking it deeper, this is really the practice of asceticism. Very important, and to realize that Bhante Punnaji had made it very simple, that it is our emotions that really is bringing all kinds of trouble. And it is important for us to cultivate how we can tame our emotions and steer clear of reacting to our emotions. So emotional reaction to sensual feelings, to emotional urges, what does it do to us? We think that we can seek happiness by doing that. Emotional reaction, trying to seek happiness. That's what people are doing when they react to emotions. They're trying to look for happiness, right? And they think they can do that. So what do? They exert effort to go after what is being desired. So they really want to obtain what they desire. Then they exert the effort to fight against what is being hated, what they don't like. They fight against it, and that creates a lot of conflict. And they exert effort to run away from what is feared. So these are really a lot of effort that cause a lot of conflict and a lot of dukkha, right? Stress, distress, unhappiness, dissatisfactoriness, insecurity. And of course, if we are not able to get it, we're not able to attain what we wish for, we begin to feel sad, and we express the emotion through grief and lamentation. And this is really the beginning of all kinds of dukkha. So expressing grief and lamentation when efforts fail. This is what Bhante Punnaji explained, and this is very beautifully explained in this way. And the other extremity is really the opposite of that, forceful effort to restrain our emotions, thinking that we're trying to be good, and trying to be good is forcing ourselves not to experience any kind of pleasures, and not to find satisfaction in our efforts. So this forceful effort is really the emotional reaction trying to become good, thinking that we become good by forcing ourselves not to indulge in those things through forceful effort. And this is really resisting going after what is being desired, resisting, fighting against what is being hated, so you're stuck with it and you're being affected by it. Resisting, running away from what is being feared. And with all this, of course, you will not find happiness. And thinking that trying to be good is really very uncomfortable. And finally, when you experience the discomfort and grief and lamentation, you deny that. And you're bottling it all up. and all this is bringing in a lot of inner conflict. So this is really the other extremities to be avoided, to be stayed away from, and that's what the Buddha pointed out. So the Buddha pointed out there is a middle way, the medial way actually, and that middle way basically, Bhante Punnaji has summarized it very beautifully. Right? First he says, it is conscious relaxation. So when we experience emotional urges, the one extreme is we react to it, we want it, and we do something to go after it. The other extremity is, we hold on and bottle up our emotions and fight against it. Bhante says, no, the solution is conscious relaxation. When something arouses your emotion, learn how to relax. So this is really conscious relaxation. And when you're able to relax, you can bring your mind inwards. You can bring your mind and focus inwards. What's going on inside you? How is this affecting me? And all that. And this is introspective attention. And when you're able to do that, you begin to comprehend, understand more deeply what is affecting you, how it is affecting you, and finally you can cultivate this peace of mind, stillness of mind, mental equilibrium. And then this is really the whole process that the Buddha was trying to teach, the solution to dukkha. And that is all found in the Eightfold Way, the way leading to the cessation of dukkha, the Eightfold Way. I would like to share with you an important commentary that Bhante Punnaji made. In his book, the Arya Magga Bhavana Level 1, page 22 to 23, and Bhante mentioned, this means to enjoy pleasure is to be bad, and to be uncomfortable is to be good. That means if you pursue after pleasures and you fight against displeasures, that is really being bad, so to speak. And you think that you can find happiness doing that. And the other extremity, trying to be good, you force yourself, self-torment, self-mortification, and that is really very uncomfortable. So enjoy pleasures is to be bad, and to be uncomfortable, fighting against it, is to be good. And this is how people normally tend to think. And this is why people tend to prefer to be happy and bad, pursuing sensual pleasures, and rather than to be unhappy, uncomfortable, and be good. This was why the Puritans became unpopular. The Puritans basically are those who practice self-torment, self-mortification, asceticism. The wisdom of the Buddha brought about a solution to this problem. The medial path of conscious relaxation of tensions resulted in reaching a happiness that was also good. So by practicing this conscious relaxation, introspective attention, and finally attaining mental equilibrium, this is really a kind of happiness that money cannot buy. You don't pursue after that. You simply, by relaxing, introspecting, and bringing the mind to a state of stillness and calmness. And that is a kind of happiness, very blissful happiness. And that you are being good also. So this is really the third way. The medial way is not really a compromise between pursuing sensual pleasures and restraining from it. It is really a third way. When something arouses your emotions, learn to relax, bring your attention inwards, and then learn how to still the mind, stilling your emotions. So this is really the medial way. So when the Buddha delivered his first sermon, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, he mentioned those four noble truths. There is dukkha, and Bhante says this is the insecurity of life. And there is a reason behind it, there are causes behind it. The origin of this insecurity is that we are all living in a dream of existence, we can bring it all to an end, cessation of this insecurity of life, by awakening, by gaining full consciousness, awakening from the dream of existence. And this is accomplished through the practice that is the way leading to the awakening, and this is the supernormal Eightfold Way, which is commonly translated as the Noble Eightfold Path. Let's take a look at these four noble truths. The first noble truth, there is dukkha. And what is dukkha? The Buddha pointed out that there are 8 conditions of dukkha: birth, aging, sickness, and death. This is the universal problem of existence that every religion is trying to solve. And then there is separation from what is pleasing. This is really suffering. That means we have come across something that was pleasant to us, that we enjoyed, that brought us some form of sensual happiness. Now we have lost it, separation from it, and then we are experiencing dukkha. The next is that we have experienced things that disturb us, that hurt us, that is painful, and we don't like it, but we're stuck with it. And so union with what is displeasing, that is dukkha. And we also have dreams and ambitions and aspirations of wanting something that we haven't got yet. We're going after it, and we fail to get it. That is dukkha. Not to get what one wants. That is dukkha. And finally, the mother of all dukkha, and that is personalizing everything we experience. See, we experience things through our 5 senses. That is how we experience the world, through the 5 senses. And experiencing the world through the 5 senses, that is pancha kanda, commonly translated as 5 aggregate. It is the fact that when we experience the environment, we begin to cling on and personalize every experience and say, this is mine. The I, me, or mine arises. This is a kind of delusion of self-centered existence. And when we begin to do that, and this is really the mother of all suffering, when we begin to cling on to every sensual experience, that is bringing us a lot of dukkha. And this is pancha upadana kanda, that is commonly translated as the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Bhante Punnaji explained it beautifully, very precisely, by saying that we are personalizing the 5 constituents of the process of perception, and this is dukkha. That is, when we experience the environment, this is really the process of perception. We personalize everything we experience and say, oh, I like this, I don't like this, this is mine, this is not mine. So we personalize that experience. This is the mother of all suffering. The first noble truth the Buddha pointed out, it is very important that we understand what it is. So therefore, the first noble truth is to be understood, right? So understanding is forming this, what is called right view. The second noble truth, the second noble truth is talking about the origin of dukkha. How we experience dukkha. Why is it that we experience dukkha? And in the sermon, it is said that it is this tanha. Now that is a very important word, commonly translated as craving. It is craving, and this is what you find in a lot of Buddhist books talking about craving. They are really referring to this Pali term tanha. I'll explain a bit more in a moment. It is this tanha which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. What the Buddha was trying to point out here is that it is our reaction to emotional urges that is causing us to seek delight. That if it is something pleasant, we want to get it. If it is something unpleasant, we want to push it away. And then we want to go after what we think is mine, my I, me, or mine. Very self-centered. So it is this tanha. Now, at this point, I want to point out very clearly, the word tanha really means emotional reaction. And this is why Bhante Punnaji's explanations are so beautiful and so precise, because he translated the word with such precision in English language, it cannot be misunderstood. Because when we talk about craving, what is craving? If it is something you don't like, are you craving for it? So craving doesn't make sense. Emotional reaction, that is what tanha is about. Emotional reaction is really the real meaning behind the Pali term tanha. When we experience something, we cling on to this experience, we react to it. We want to express our tensions in action, and that is tanha. The wanting to express this tension in action is tanha. And there are three kinds of tanha. That is tanha for sensual pleasures, that means something pleasant, oh, you have a lust and greed towards it. And tanha for non-existence, it is something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it, you don't want it to exist, you push it away, you wish that it will stop, it will end. And there is also tanha for continued existence, this delusion of the I, me or mine, thinking that this body is me, right? Even thinking that this mind is me, all this I, me or mine, you want to go on to exist. You don't want to die. How many of you want to die tomorrow? Or next week? Next month? Next year? Right? How long do you want to live? So really, we want to go on existing. This tanha for continued existence. Now these three these are actually what is called the three kinds of tanha. They lead to three evil roots, right? And these are leading us to behave in a manner that either it is lobha. Lobha refers to the behavior where we have lust and greed towards something pleasant. So it's the lust and greed for pleasures. Or if it is unpleasant, we want to fight against it, it is dosa. Dosa is this aversion and hatred towards these pleasures. Now it's very important to take a look at the words that I use. I say lust and greed. It's not the same thing. Lust is when you experience something pleasant and now you want it. Wanting it, that is lust. And of course, when we get what we want, are you always satisfied and say, oh, now I got what I want, I'm not going to have more? Right? You made $1 million this year, you're going to say, okay, that's it, I'm not going to make more than $1 million. No, we want more. So the wanting more is greed. So lust actually transforms into greed if you don't tame the lust. If you don't learn how to control your lust turns into greed. The next one is aversion and hatred. When you experience something unpleasant, you want to avoid it. Aversion. You don't want it. You want to get away from it. So that is aversion. But if you can't run away from it, if you can't avoid it, and it keeps happening to you, then you start to get angry. And when you start to get angry, you have to be careful, because that anger turns into ill will. That anger turns into hatred. You begin to hate it because you can't get rid of it anymore. So that's why aversion, which is trying to avoid something, can turn into hatred, which is very strong ill will towards it. Right? This time you really want to exterminate it in a very forceful way, and that is hatred towards these pleasures. And now the third evil root is moha. Lobha, dosa and moha. Moha is often translated as ignorance or delusion, but it is really the delusion of a self-centered existence, the I, me or mine arising in the mind. So it is this self-centered existence, the delusion of the self-centered existence, that is moha. And we behave according to these three habits or three habitual reactions: lobha, dosa, moha. Or all unwholesome behavior arises from these. It is important, when the Buddha spoke about the second noble truth, he says that the cause of dukkha is to be abandoned. So when we understand the second noble truth, the causes of dukkha, the origin of dukkha is to be abandoned. Now, one of the most important things I have learned from Bhante Punnaji is the fact that he has made it very simple by pointing out it is our emotional mind that is causing us all the troubles in the world. It is our emotions. And in fact, the Buddha stated it very clearly in this phrase here in Samyutta Nikaya. And basically Bhante Punnaji translated it. Emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. See, the key word here is chitta, chittena, right? Talking about our emotional reaction. And this is something, one of the key things when you want to understand what Bhante Punnaji is trying to translate. He's being very precise. He makes a distinction between the three words that describe conditions of the mind, right? Vijnana, mano, and chitta. He makes a differentiation between these. They are not talking about the same thing. Mind is not one thing. The mind is really a conglomeration of three things, and the Buddha pointed out it is vijnana, mano, and chitta. So Bhante Punnaji makes a distinction between these three. He does not merge it all into one. One of the reasons why a lot of people have a bit of a confusion and merge, and a lot of translators merge the three into one and say, oh, mind is mind. There is no distinction between what kind of mind. So when you talk about chitta, people say that's mind. When you talk about mano, people say mind. Actually, all this stems from the fact that in the Abhidhamma, it is the word chitta is being used throughout, but Abhidhamma, we know, are not the exact words of the Buddha. So therefore, almost in the entire Abhidhamma, every aspect of mind is called chitta, and this is why people get misunderstanding of the word chitta means mind, and that's it. There is no distinction. Bhante Punnaji very clearly points out chitta is referring to the affective process of mind. Even psychologists and neurologists today, right, and neuroscientists today are explaining that we have a cognitive process in the mind, we have an affective process in the mind, and chitta is referring to this affective process, commonly called emotions. Right? The layman term for affective process is emotions. So emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. And in fact, the Buddha said this beautifully in one of the Dhammapada verses, where the Buddha pointed out that it is this self-affliction of mental suffering. And this Dhammapada verse 42 says, whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, one's ill-directed emotions inflict upon oneself a greater harm. That means people can hurt you in one way or another. People can say nasty things to you one way or another. What they say is not really what is hurting you. It is the way you interpret what is being spoken to you. It is your emotions, the way you direct your emotions towards what is happening to you. So in other words, suffering doesn't come from what happens to you. Suffering comes from how you interpret what happens to you and how you react to this interpretation. So the Buddha pointed out it is self-affliction of mental suffering. And the Buddha was very clear about this. It's not talking about just physical pain. Now we experience physical pain. A person who has no food, he experiences hunger, and that is a physical pain. But how does he interpret his lack of food? And what does he do in reaction to that? And that is what brings suffering. If he goes out and starts to steal food and do unwholesome things to get food, then he is actually bringing upon himself a lot of suffering associated with that. He could get arrested, thrown in jail, and so on. So it's really this ill-directed emotions. And ill-directed emotions is mental proliferation, the mind running away with imagination, memory, expectations. Imagination is imagining something that hasn't happened yet, something in the future. Memory is recalling something in the past, something that happened in the past. You remembered it. And expectation is looking at the present and not being satisfied, dissatisfied with the present. You wanted to change it. You have expectations. So imagination, memory, expectations, they bring us a lot of self-affliction of mental suffering. And this is really summarized as mental proliferation. And we become under the spell of this emotional excitement. Right? So emotions bring us all the suffering. So that was self-affliction of mental suffering. Now let's take a look at the neuroscience behind all this. See, it is the activity of the brain that we call mind. Mind is not something that exists. Well, the brain exists, but it is the activity of the brain that we call mind. Okay? So in the brain, there are three major parts of the brain. The brain has evolved over millions of years. There are three major parts. Right? The most primitive part of the brain is called the brain stem, that is at the end of the spinal cord, and the brain stem is responsible for our survival, and often this is called the survival brain. And in the middle part of the brain there is the limbic system, and this is commonly called the affective process, the emotional brain. Right? This is the part of the brain that causes the release of hormones, and the release of hormones and it floods the body and causes changes to the body, making us experience some kind of physical stress, and that leads to distress, emotional mind. And the limbic system is responsible for this emotional mind. And finally, the third and outermost layer of the brain, the most evolved, the most recently evolved part of the brain, that is the cerebral cortex, responsible for our cognitive process, our thinking, our learning brain, they call this. Right? So there's these three parts of the brain. The limbic system, in the middle, in the deep inside the limbic system, the emotional brain, emotional command center, there is a little structure called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the cause of all our suffering, really. When the amygdala is aroused, what happens? So what does the amygdala do first? The amygdala scans everything that we are experiencing. So every experience from our senses comes in, passes through the amygdala, and then the amygdala determines one thing: is this a threat or is this not a threat? And the moment the amygdala determines something that may appear to be a threat, it then triggers a chain reaction, releasing hormones all over the body. And this causes a bodily physiological change, and this is called the fight or flight reaction. This part of the amygdala is evolved to protect us from harm. So it is there to prevent us from being hurt or harmed by environmental activities. Take for example, somebody throws a ball at you. So it's a fast approaching object, and it causes the body to react. You don't have time to think. So when somebody throws a ball at you and you saw it coming, you either duck or you knock it away or you catch it or something like that. So that reaction is to prevent you from getting hit by the ball. So that is really what the amygdala is trying to do, protect us. So the amygdala behaves as a bodyguard in this sense. But the amygdala also has a paradoxical role. Not only it protects us from harm as a bodyguard, it actually also reacts in such a way, right, that if it is aroused unnecessarily, it can trigger all kinds of emotional chain reaction inside us: fear, panic, anger, anxiety, disgust, distress, and so on. And all these are really bringing a lot of suffering to us. And therefore the amygdala, when it is aroused unnecessarily, it really becomes a terrorist in the brain. So it is very important to understand what the amygdala does to us. And learning meditation, learning how to meditate, is really to learn how to calm and still this amygdala, so that the amygdala doesn't get aroused, so there is no biochemical chain reaction in the body causing tensions in the body, stress, and leading to distress. If we don't do that, right, if we allow this reaction to go on, then we are going back to our very basic animal instincts. And there is an ancient shloka that explains this. Right? A shloka is really a poetic verse that teach people some important lessons in life. So this shloka is actually teaching children how not to behave like animals. And this shloka goes something like that. It says, taking food, sleeping, avoiding dangers, sexual activities, these acts are common between animals and humans. In fact, these acts are common between all living organisms. They need rest, they need to avoid harm and dangers, they need to reproduce. Sexual activities is for the purpose of reproduction, and these acts are common between all kinds of animals. Human beings, is just a species of animal. So these are the various acts that are common. And this shloka went on to say that the ability to think, and that is what makes humans different. The ability to think is what makes humans different, and without thinking, humans are just like animals. In other words, if we behave reacting to our sensual pleasures, reacting to our anger, we are really behaving like animals, and this is to be avoided. How can we avoid this? We have to learn how to overcome this animal instincts. And how do we overcome the animal instinct in every one of us? Fortunately, we are endowed with an outermost part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, that can help us. The cerebral cortex is made of four major lobes, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe over the top, the occipital lobe at the back, and of course the temporal lobes on both sides. Right? Of all the four lobes, it is really the frontal lobe that is most important for our thinking. And it is responsible for all those functions listed there. But out of all those functions listed there, the last two lines are the most important ones, and these are the functions that help us find happiness. And all this is really the activity of that part of the brain right at the bottom in the front, and that is called the prefrontal cortex, right behind the eyebrow. It is responsible for decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. All this can help us accomplish happiness in life by applying this thinking brain to be able to think through every problem and make decisions that are wholesome and helpful, that can bring us peace and happiness. So when we talk about the mind as an activity, the Buddha used three words to point out what is the mind. The first word is vijnana. Vijnana refers to our experiencing of the environment, and Bhante Punaji calls this the process of perception. Vijnana is really referring to perceiving what is happening through our senses. We're able to see something, we have perceived visual object. We heard a sound, we have perceived through our auditory, right? So it's auditory object. So perceiving, right, through all our five senses and putting it all together. Putting it all together is the work of Mano. Mano is the second aspect of the mind, and this is more or less correlates with what neuroscientists call the cognitive process. And this deals with cognition and conception. Cognition is being able to realize what it is, to cognize what you have experienced. Conception then makes stories behind it, creating thoughts and stories and concepts behind what you have perceived, and what you have cognized, right? And this is the cognitive process. And the third part of the brain is the chitta, which is the affective process, and this is responsible for our mood and our temperament. And this is what makes Bhante Punnaji so unique. He was able to explain this by differentiating and discerning between these three parts of the mind: the vijnana, the mano, and the chitta. The chitta is really the emotional part of the mind. It is giving rise to our emotional reaction. We react to it because of chitta, and that is tanha. And because we experience things, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, and this is the feeling vedana, whether it is something is pleasant or unpleasant, and we react to it, and that reaction is tanha. Not only do we react, we are also inherently self-centered. So the chitta is also responsible for this part of the mind which leads to upadana, commonly translated as clinging, but is really personalizing every experience. And this makes us think that we are living in a dream of existence. And this is bhava tanha, the reaction to existence, self-centered existence. So the first part is perceiving the environment. The second part is cognizing what was perceived and then conceptualizing what has been cognized. And the third part is the affection, feeling whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, and then having this emotional urge, wanting to react, and the tanha, the reaction, and leading to self-centeredness. This is really what goes on in our mind, the three aspects of the mind. And this is where Bhante Punnaji's explanations are so beautiful and so precise that he's able to discern between these three aspects of the mind. When you understand these three aspects of the mind, you can then be able to meditate more successfully, able to progress further in your meditation. Because meditation is about stilling the chitta and then sharpening the mano. And if you don't differentiate between these two, if you don't discern between these two, you will not be able to meditate successfully, because you're mixing up emotions with thinking, right? So understanding these three different aspects of the mind is very important. And they lead to behavior: lobha, dosa, moha. Lobha is the behavior where we pursue after something we lust for, lust and greed. Dosa is when we pursue something which we don't want, we want to get rid of it, aversion and hatred. And moha is this self-centered existence. When lust is aroused, judgment is turned off. So in other words, when the chitta is active, hyperactive, the mano is shut down. The mano, it cannot think clearly. So when lust is aroused, judgment is turned off. And the more aroused a person, the less access to clear judgment. So we have to be careful of our arousal. And that is one extreme, pursuing after sensual pleasures. The other extreme, when we are experiencing something unpleasant, then our behavior is dosa. The amygdala reacts to perceived threats, and it produces a chain reaction. And there is a part of the brain that thinks like a dog, that thinks like a crocodile, or thinks like a monkey. In other words, we have these animal instincts. We talked about that earlier, these animal instincts, right? And the amygdala reacts, acts as the engine for threat reactions. Therefore, when we perceive there is a threat, the amygdala is aroused, and the chain reaction causes all kinds of reaction, emotional reaction. But it is our frontal lobe, it is our thinking brain, our mano, that is able to apply some brakes and stop it. So it's really the frontal lobe that is helping us to stop our emotional reaction. Therefore, the application of this frontal lobe, especially the prefrontal cortex right behind the eyebrow, that part of the brain responsible for our happiness. And it is applying this that helps us to calm down the amygdala. Otherwise, when the amygdala reacts, we are behaving like animals. So it is the frontal lobe that acts as the brakes to stop this engine of for threat reactions. So when overwhelmed by anger, we are literally temporarily insane until the amygdala can be controlled. So how do we control the amygdala? How do we tame it? How can we stop the amygdala from reacting? And here Bhante Punnaji explained it very simply, beautifully, that we can eliminate emotions. We can tame the emotions and stop it by cultivating selective thinking, by using our thinking brain, our mano, our cognitive process. Let's take a look at what Bhante has to say about this.
One message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this end. If we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, Mano means that thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called Chitta. Mano Pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method, and that is what we are using in this book. If you read this book, here the Buddha is, I am talking about this, that what is called the 7 steps to awakening, Sapta Bojjhanga. The Sapta Bojjhanga is really using that same principle, and that is how the emotions are completely eliminated. And that elimination of the emotion, this is not understood by all the modern meditators who talk about vipassana, bhavana and all that. They are unaware of this. This is why this message that I am talking about is a very important message, that this has to be conveyed to the world. And that is how our friend is now prepared to do these things, that we will be able to somehow convey this message to the world, that the Buddha, how he eliminated all emotions, lobha, dosa and moha, lust, hate and delusion, completely eradicated. He was able to do this because of the Sapta Bojjhanga, based on the principle that you get in the first verse in the Dhammapada.
So it is our thinking mind, the cognitive process, that can help us stop the affective process. If we look at it from the neuroscience point of view, we have, in summary, we have the amygdala, and this is the emotional command center responsible for various emotional states, fear, panic, anger, and our psychological disturbances. It is because of the activity of the amygdala that leads to this affective process, or commonly called emotions. And then there is this prefrontal cortex, or commonly called the PFC, prefrontal cortex. This is really the cognitive command center responsible for our conscious rational thoughts, where we can tame the amygdala. And this leads to this cognitive process, cognition and conception. So what does meditation do to us? Meditation helps us to still the emotions and sharpen our cognition, our thinking. This is really what meditation does for us. And the third noble truth, this is the end of suffering, nirodha, and cessation of suffering. And the Buddha said that it is the remainderless, fading away, cessation of that same tanha, right? Tanha being translated as craving. But tanha really means emotional reaction. So here it is very clear that the Buddha pointed out the cessation of suffering is eliminating and stopping remainderless of tanha, emotional reaction. And that's why Bhante Punnaji's explanation is so beautiful. He discerns between the various aspects of the mind, the mano, the chitta, and the vijnana, and then he makes it very clear it is our emotional mind that is causing us all the troubles in the world. So tanha, emotional reaction, and that would be to give up, giving up, relinquishing emotional reactions. In other words, we stop reacting in an emotional manner, and then becoming free from it, the freedom from emotional reaction. And finally, not relying on emotional reactions for our happiness. This is where a lot of people got it wrong. They think that by pleasing the emotions, we can become happy. But that happiness is firstly short-lived, and secondly is a double-edged sword. It can bring us a lot of suffering from that too, right? If we behave in unwholesome ways in order to bring us pleasures, it is a double-edged sword. It will bring us all kinds of suffering afterwards. So here the Buddha pointed out the third noble truth is really the cessation of all suffering, and that is to give up your emotions, and that is to become free from it and not rely on it, and that is really to be realized. And this third noble truth is to be realized. And finally, the fourth noble truth. Basically, the fourth noble truth is a description of the Eightfold Way. The way leading to the cessation of suffering are these 8 stages of cultivation and development. And I won't go into this, I'll just very quickly give a summary view of it. But what is important to realize here is that the Buddha stated that this Eightfold Way is the practice, and it is to be cultivated. Meaning we got to do something about it, we got to put it into practice and cultivate and develop it until fruition, right? Until we are able to accomplish nirodha. So we must keep trying. This is the magga, the way leading to the cessation of suffering, to be cultivated, right? So a quick overview of this supernormal eightfold way of cultivation. I'm using the translation of Bhante Punnaji, but I'm also using the popular common translation, so it's easy to understand for those who have been reading a lot of other Buddhist books. The first part is saddha. Saddha is a combination of confidence and devotion. A lot of people have mistranslated the word saddha to mean faith. Saddha doesn't mean faith. Faith as in blind faith, you put your faith in something. No. You actually practice it, you realize what it is, you experience it, and then you become confident with it. And when you become confident with it, you become devoted to wanting to do it. So the first part, confidence and devotion, that comes from right view, or what Bhante Punnaji says is harmonious perspective. To have a clear understanding what this is all about, saddha. And that is confidence and devotion. And the second part is virya, willpower and energy, wanting to make the changes. And when you want to make the changes, you begin to practice it. And then therefore you have right speech, right action, right livelihood. Bhante Punnaji calls them harmonious speech, harmonious action, and harmonious lifestyle. All these are sila, cultivating morality. And this is really purifying the bodily part, purification of the body, so that you now behave in a wholesome way, behave in a moral and virtuous way. Finally, the third part is the green part, and that pertains to meditation. Samadhi, often mistranslated as concentration, but what samadhi is really mental equilibrium, a tranquility of the mind, stillness of the mind. And this is really the meditation part, dealing with purification of the mind. I will talk about this in more detail next time. And this brings to the conclusion this morning's sharing on the Four Noble Truths, or the Four Supernormal Realities. Thank you very much. And with the ending of this sharing, let us now share the merits. Let's put our palms together and recite together. We dedicate the merits we acquired from sharing of the Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be free from suffering. May the fear-struck be free from fear. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we dedicate this morning's session to the memory of our beloved teacher, Venerable Dr. Punnaji. For all that he has done for us, we will always be grateful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.